I get calls all the time from medical device startup companies that are developing a new software app. Software is a medical device. But one of the things they struggle with is how do we document all the development work that we've done? The problem is that they should have started documenting the development work before they started developing it all. And I talk about that in the blog that I posted on Tuesday. But I thought I would narrow it down to a really strong example that explains what happens when you don't do this in the right order. And the example that I want to use is the hazard analysis. The software hazard analysis is one of the documents that you have to provide with your 510K submission or de novo. It would also be required if you were going for CE marking. Whatever type of regulatory submission you're doing for a software as a medical device or an embedded system is going to need some hazard analysis identifying what are the hazards associated with that software. And with software as a medical device, the first reaction I get is like, it's software. How can it possibly hurt anybody? Well, of course, it can't physically hurt somebody, but it creates a hazardous situation, and that can cause harm or it can cause a delay in treatment. So any delay in treatment or any hazardous situation that can result in harm, those are things that would be considered hazards. And the FDA actually has gone through a lot of submissions and said, where's this hazard? Where's this hazard? They ask you, where are these hazards that we're expecting to see in your software documentation? And they don't see it, so they ask you to redo your hazard analysis. So here's what happens. Company comes to us, says, we have working software. We tried applying for a 510K and they want this hazard analysis and we don't know how to do it. Or they've hired our firm to help them with a 510K. And one of the pieces they're struggling with providing to us is a hazard analysis. Well, if I were going to create one from scratch, the first thing that I would do is I would go through the AAMI standard. There's an ANSI AAMI IEC TIR. TIR stands for Technical Information Report. It's a guidance document that tells you how to apply 14971 specifically to software. And the standard number or guidance is 80002-1. And it's a 2009 version. So it's 8 3 zeros, a 1, 8 3 zeros and a 2-1, and it's a 2009 standard. And don't get confused like I just did, because there is also an 8001-1, and it's a 2010 version, and that has to do with IT networks. And we happen to have that standard as well on our database. So that's how I got confused when I went hunting for it. So what you need to do when you're doing a hazard analysis, and I see we're out of focus here. That's a little better. Sorry about that momentary glitch. What you want to do is buy that standard. If you have an AAMI membership, you save usually about half the cost on your purchase of standards. So it's $145. And if you look on any other websites where I look, even the evs.e, you're going to pay a lot more than $300 for that standard. So $145 is a really good price, and it just about justifies the cost of membership to AAMI all by itself. So you get your AAMI membership, you purchase that guidance document. It's ANSI AAMI IEC TIR 80002-1 2009, and you go to Annex B. In Annex B of that document, there is a table that provides all kinds of software risks that you should be expecting to see in a typical software. And so you go down that list and say, does this apply? And it's possible some of the functions that are in there don't apply to your software. But this whole guidance document was designed for software as a medical device. So there's definitely going to be some in there. And since it's multiple pages long, it's not 1 or 2 lines, it's table that goes on for pages. I think it's almost 6 pages long. So when you have that much in the way of examples of potential hazards. If you can't come up with more than 4 or 5, there's something wrong. Try again. And that's just one step. Normally, if I had an embedded system, I would say, go to the 24971 guidance document, look at Annex A, and there's 37 questions there. Answer those 37 questions, and that'll identify some hazards for you. You should still do that, but most of them aren't going to apply to software. A second thing I tell people to do is go to the ISO 14971 standard in Annex C1. You will see a table that categorizes different types of hazards. This is, of course, the 2019 version. I go there. I go through each of the categories. There are only a couple of them in the far right-hand column that are specific to data. And so loss of data, mix-up of data, somebody preventing delivery or corruption of that data in some way. All those are potential things that could happen in software. So that gives you two things you could do before you even pull up this standard. You would also go to any existing device that you have, any previous versions of your device, any competitor products, and find problems with them. Well, how in the world would I, if it's my first product ever, how would I know? Because I have no previous versions. Your competitors do. If you're going down the 510K pathway, your competitor already has a product on the market. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a predicate. And you can go to the MAUDE database and identify what problems that 3-letter product code has had reported. Now, if there are absolutely none, that means it's a pretty low-risk software device. But if there are some listed there, that gives you something that you can identify as potential hazards already based on the MAUDE database. So that's something you really need to make sure that you're doing, is look at other databases for similar devices, predicate devices, even other countries, try to identify risk, go through those two other standards. But the number one source of hazards is going to be this 8002-1 standard. Now, how is important when you do this? If you develop your software and then you ask me, could you please document my hazards? I'm going to just go through robotically and copy all those and just cross out the ones that don't apply to your type of device. But I don't know whether you've actually developed any risk controls that are appropriate for the hazards I identify. So if I identify a hazard and you don't have a risk control for it, how are you going to validate that that risk control has been, how are you going to identify that that risk has been addressed somewhere in your design? You're not going to be able to. So that's a serious problem. And you could try after the fact to add something into your labeling, some warning or something, but that's not the requirement of 14971. Your requirement is you have to first address it with risk controls by design. Second, you implement protective measures. Well, both of those are possible with software. You could develop all kinds of different risk controls that are by design or by protective measures to give the person a warning. Oh, this doesn't look right. This doesn't, have you done this? Yes, you can add something to your labeling that informs them of those risks and recommends things that they could do, but you should do the other two things first. So when the FDA asks for a traceability matrix, if I've given you your hazard analysis and I put that in one column of the traceability matrix, you're going to fall short on the risk controls column, and you're not going to have any verification validation that you can do because you really didn't create a risk control to address all the risks. You need to do the hazard analysis first. So when you're developing your code, you have those particular risks or hazards identified as design inputs or software requirement specifications. And I'm not saying you have to follow a linear process. I understand that people do iterative process development, iterative product development when they're doing software. They use agile systems. So every time you add a feature to or function to your software, you're going to introduce new potential hazards. And some of those hazards that you identified for another module are going to apply to this software module too. So you have to implement those same risk controls again for the new module. So maybe more unit testing, maybe more system integration testing, more systems testing, more full product validation. These are the things you have to do. But the sequence is important to understand. If I identify a hazard after the fact, you won't have the risk controls in place, so you won't be able to do the verification and validation because there won't be a control there to validate. Whereas if you do the hazard identification first, now you use that as an SRS requirement, and now you should have a risk control that's identified in your SDS, which is another thing that's in that design. I'm sorry, in that traceability matrix for your software documentation, and you should have some unit testing and some system integration testing. So everything should work really well if you do it in the right order. Now, the article I published on Tuesday, it goes through the other parts of the software documentation. It explains what things go first, what things go at the end, what things go in the middle. These software hazard analysis, these are things that are going to happen early in your software development process and really kind of a little bit before you're going to actually start writing code. It could be after you've developed an algorithm, but before you wrote code that executes that algorithm. That's important to understand the difference. A lot of companies are doing AI, using AI's tools to develop an algorithm to do some sort of calculation or detect something. You can wait until that's nailed down and then start doing your coding. But if you start your coding and you haven't done any kind of hazard analysis, it's going to present a serious problem for you. Okay, so that's basically the concept of why the order matters. When should you do the hazard analysis? It should be maybe right after you've developed your algorithm and before you start the coding, or at the very beginning of you starting coding. And every time you add a feature, you may have to do it again for that specific add-on that you've created, that new feature you've added. You might have to say, oh, now that we've added a feature, we have to go back to the beginning again, and we have to figure out what hazards are associated with this new module, what risk controls should be in place, what's our new SDS for that particular module. And yes, you should organize your SDS and your SRS and your hazard identification by modules, which is a part of the reason why you're supposed to do that architecture diagram at the beginning of your whole process. The architecture diagram comes before your hazard analysis, and your software description comes before your hazard analysis. If you don't know what you're developing and you don't know what the architecture is going to look like, and you don't even have a procedure, that's another thing you need at the very beginning. You need a procedure for software development, a software quality system. How are you going to control and document your entire development process? That should have been thought of before you even started the project. So those three things right at the beginning. Number one, the procedure. Number two, the software description. Number three, the software architecture diagram. Those should be first. Then you do a hazard analysis, and you're going to have to repeat that hazard analysis and update all your documents except maybe your procedure as you add new features to your product. So an agile process, it doesn't mean you don't have to go back and update those other documents. It doesn't mean you just update code. You have to update all those other documents except maybe the procedure itself. And each time you add a new module, you're going to have some new hazards. You're going to have some new things that you have to test, new software requirements, because that information from that new module goes somewhere, and some information might be going to that module so it can process it before it spits out an answer. So there are inputs and outputs to every single module you add. Every feature you add has inputs and outputs. And if you look at that process flow diagram in your architecture, you're going to say, oh, I need to worry about a new input and a new output, and I need to worry about functions within that software, and I need to figure out how I'm going to execute some sort of test to make sure it performs correctly. So that's why the sequence is so important. Now, nobody ever asked me this question, but it's a really smart question to ask, and I sort of provided that information in Tuesday's article. What things can I wait till the very end to do? There are actually a couple of things you could wait till the very end to do and would be a waste of time to work on them early because you just be spinning your wheels. You're not done. One of those things is a traceability matrix. The traceability matrix is just a pointer document pointing you to the different things. Now, you could use that to make sure that you have a software requirement spec and a hazard and an SDS and a test for every single item, but it shouldn't be necessary. The reason why that shouldn't be necessary at all, number one, every single one of these hazards that you identified should be numbered. Most companies inherently will design a software quality system so the hazard number that they use, let's say it's hazard 5, hazard 6, hazard 7, they'll have a software requirement spec that matches up with those hazards, and they'll have also SDSs that match up with those numbers. So by tracing the numbers, you can see, oh, I'm missing a number. Why am I missing a number? Oh, it's covered by something else. So make a note so you don't have that, you're not wondering where it went next time. So it's really important to make sure you have some sort of a numbering system that facilitates that traceability. You don't want to just randomly pick numbers or pick them even sequentially in chronological order. That would be bad. You want to have a numbering system for the hazards and have that match up with your SRS and your SDS and everything else. So that's one of the strategies. Another strategy is most software companies, if they're smart enough to develop software as a medical device or software in a medical device, they're also smart enough to develop some sort of database that can track all this and keep track of the traceability so they don't have to worry about the output. A lot of companies will actually spend the money on an ALM system. So these ALM systems keep track of the versions of the software, and every time you make a change, it tracks it. And it makes sure that you went back and did a test for every single thing you were supposed to, and you have that traceability. It's a configuration management tool. So every time you add a requirement, it makes sure that all the other things that go with that are done. If you don't have some kind of a simple ALM system that you created yourself at a minimum, or you didn't buy somebody else's, you're going to have problems. A spreadsheet could be used, but there is a point at which a spreadsheet is not helpful. When I'm telling you out of the guidance document with no thought whatsoever and knowing nothing about your product, I come up with 6 pages of a table of potential hazards. It's going to get bigger from there, not smaller from there. So you can expect that I'm going to have at least 6 pages of rows to worry about. And I'm going to have a lot of columns to worry about as well. It's going to become unwieldy. That's the job for a database. So spend the money and get either an open source database or a cheap database, or develop your own database, or buy an ALM tool, something to keep track of it all. It's important to make sure your development goes on smoothly. What's another thing that we could wait until the very end to do? Well, your software revision history. Your procedure is going to say this is how we keep track of revisions, but you don't have to build a revision history document until you're done. At the time of submission, that's when to create that. Maybe 10 minutes before I send it out, that's when I create that. Companies create it way beforehand, but then they have to keep on updating it. You don't need to do the revision history document until you're ready to submit. Why? Because you're going to make a lot more revisions as long as you're tracking your revisions. Like this was version 1.0, 1.2, 1.3. Oh, this is 1.3.1. Whatever your system is, just keep track of the revisions and create the revision history at the end. That's another document you can create at the end. A third document that you can save till the very end, your anomalies list. So any software anomalies or bugs, there's no point in writing those up until the end. Ideally, you would have no bugs, but everybody has software and bugs, software with bugs. So the question is, did you identify all the bugs? Did you address all of them and resolve them so there are no more open bugs? If there are open bugs, then can you justify releasing the product with those bugs and explain that in your anomalies or bug report or bug list? So that's what that list is for. It's any unresolved ones. If you had bugs and you closed them all, then you would say you could say, here's the list of bugs we identified, but all of them have been closed. There you go. So that shows you're keeping track of bugs. It shows you had some, but it also shows you closed them and there are no unresolved ones. But save that to the end. because hopefully you've closed them all. If you create the list too soon, the list will be long and then it'll get shorter. So you have to edit it. So wait till the end for that item too. So I've explained the things that go at the beginning. I've explained the things that go at the end. And the stuff that's in the middle, that's the stuff you're going to do over and over and over again every single time you change your code and you re-execute all your verification validation tests in your system. Module or unit tests. So every single time you go through that loop, you're going to have to redocument those, and there's nothing I can do to save you on those. You need a protocol, you execute the protocol, you have the result, and you summarize it. You could wait on the summary till the very end. So you might say the summary of our verification validation efforts, excuse me, will not be documented until the very end. Maybe just before you work on those other documents like the trace matrix and the bug report and the revision history. But the actual tests, they need to be done real time as you go through it. I hope that helps you understand why you need to do some things at the beginning of the process. Like you have to have a procedure right up front. That's why we tell these companies we offer a procedure, we offer templates, we offer training. Those are things we offer because they need those at the very beginning. If they told us they've already developed the product, then we say, okay, these are the documents we need. Do you have them? If they do, great. They're one of the very few clients that actually has all their documentation already in order the way they need it. So we know what they need at the beginning. They need a procedure. We know what they need at the end. It's these documents. It's how do you get between these 2 points? And there are specific orders of documents. And that hazard analysis is the number one that bites you. If you don't do that one before you do your code development, you're going to have trouble showing a risk control and a software requirement to address that hazard. That's the bottom line. I hope this helped everybody. If you have any further questions, please put them in the comments below. And if you have a suggestion for next week's live session, please let me know. But there will definitely be a live session next week, 12:30 Eastern time. I'm looking forward to talking with you then. Bye-bye.